Hello, everyone. We will begin in a few minutes. If you'd like to enter your name and where you're from in the chat box, that would be great. We have a very large audience tonight, so it would be interesting to see where people are tuning in from.
Okay, we are letting people in from the waiting room now.
Hello, everyone. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. If you'd like to let us know where you're from, entering your name and your location in the chat box, that would be great. We have a very large audience tonight, so we'd be interested to see where people are tuning in from. There's from Canada. I am in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, by the way. Virginia, Florida, Manhattan, Boston. Look at this. Wow. Okay, too fast for me. Baltimore. Okay. Oh, this is fantastic. There's Jack Gilroy. I was able to see that. Tucson, Chicago, Oakland, California, Long Island, New York. Welcome, everybody. We will start very shortly. There's some folks from down south, North Carolina, Texas, Nashville, and then up north, Ontario, Canada. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Iowa, South Carolina, San Diego. Somebody from Portugal, Netherlands. Wonderful. And yes, this meeting will be recorded and you will receive an email link, so no problem if you do have to leave early. And greetings from Tokyo. That's wonderful. San Antonio, Texas. Belfast, Ireland, down East Maine. Wonder what time it is in Belfast, Ireland. Indonesia. This is outstanding. There are people from all across the globe joining us. And Greta, if you want to let me know when to begin, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I think we can begin now. Thank you so much, Brad.
Sure. Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the opening session of the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal. My name is Brad Wolf. I am one of the coordinators of this tribunal. I am the executive director of Peace Action Network of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I am also a lawyer and a former prosecutor. We come together tonight during especially difficult times. Our subject tonight and in the weeks ahead is serious, but our resolve is firm. That so many of you have joined us tonight confirms our belief that information, that knowledge, combined with nonviolent direct action can change the course of history. We have over 1,700 people registered for this evening's session, coming from all across the globe. This opening session will be recorded and made available to all of you who registered, and we ask you to share that widely. We ask you to share all subsequent video links you receive from us widely. Information is power. We want to thank World Beyond War for hosting tonight's opening session and for being such a committed partner throughout this project. David Swanson and Greta Zorro have been instrumental in helping bring this tribunal to all of you. All of our organization partners, over 25 of them, are listed on our website at merchantsofdeath.org. For the past 2 years, Kathy Kelly, Nick Modern, and myself, along with a team of investigators, writers, film editors, and lawyers, have been gathering evidence to prove the guilt of 4 United States weapons manufacturers for aiding and abetting in the commission of crimes against humanity and war crimes as defined by the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. The 4 defendants are Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, now known as RTX, and the drone maker, General Atomics. These 4 weapons manufacturers are representative of the entire U.S. war industry. Last Wednesday, November 8th, 6 of us were arrested outside Raytheon Technologies in Arlington, Virginia. It was during a peaceful protest calling on Raytheon once again to respond to our allegations. We were charged with a first-degree misdemeanor of trespass, arraigned, and ordered to appear for trial. We urge all of you to consider nonviolent action as an effective method of ending militarism and endless war. In every community, there is a weapons maker. In every community, a merchant of death. The information we are presenting is meant to inform and to motivate. The evidence presented to the jurors of this tribunal and to all of you will be in the form of video documentaries, which not only provide the facts, but tell the story through the eyes of the victims. Each video will be approximately 30 minutes in length, easily accessible, and easily shareable. They will be made freely available to all groups, high schools, universities, church groups, social justice gatherings, and community organizations. Some of the areas this tribunal will examine are Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Yemen, and Gaza. We will provide evidence on the complicity of lobbyists, think tanks, and the media. Tonight, we will present the first video segment of the tribunal, which is about the repeated aerial bombardments of Gaza. Each week hereafter, you will receive an email from us with a link to the next video segment of the tribunal. These videos may be viewed by you during the week. Again, please share these video links widely. Create viewing events in your community. Form your own discussion groups. The emailing of videos to all of you will last approximately 4 months. During that time, we will have periodic live stream meetups, inviting you to participate with us in discussing the evidence we've presented, and just as importantly, to discuss actions you would like to take in your community. We want to serve as a resource for all of you to take action. The first meetup session will be 3 weeks from tonight, Sunday, December 3rd at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We will alter the times of the meetups to account for viewers in different time zones. You will receive an email invitation to the meetup on December 3rd and all subsequent meetups. We thank you for being with us tonight, for caring, for being a part of this People's Tribunal. We will now show a brief 10-minute video we created that outlines the work this tribunal has done, defining what a People's Tribunal is, and making clear why a tribunal is needed now against these defendants. When that short video concludes, Kathy Kelly will speak to you about our panel of jurors. Nick Modern will then speak to you briefly about the origins of the tribunal. We then will proceed to the video evidence of Gaza. We do want to warn you that the videos you see tonight contain graphic images of war and may be disturbing. We nevertheless feel it important to show the crimes of these defendants. Thank you. The consequences of war are chillingly clear: suffering, death, and destruction. This is so often inflicted on civilian populations who have no true involvement in the conflict at hand. What is it that drives such state-sanctioned cruelty against others? What would be the cause of such inhumanity?
Any militaristic response to a situation, I think it's a form of spiritual decay. It's a form of moral decrepitude. And we have to bring a spiritual and moral, not just a critique, but a witness. We have to intervene. We have to do something about it. That's part of the great legacy of Dorothy Day and Rabbi Heschel and Martin Luther King Jr., that they recognized that this was a cancer. Militarism is a cancer, and it can't be simply talked about. You actually have to attempt to do something about it.
We will never have a firm tally of everyone who has died in Washington's post-9/11 wars in Iraq, Syria, Somalia, Yemen, Philippines, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Syria, so forth. We'll never know. Now, it's important to put this into context of these corporations, because these corporations are pressuring Congress, they're pressuring the military, they are developing, marketing, and selling all manner of goods and services that then harm these civilians.
In the United States of today, a country perpetually at war for the last 75 years, American citizens are subjected to extraordinary manipulation to pay for and condone wars of choice, with vulnerable non-combatants paying the deadly price. The United States is a corporate state where big business has captured our executive, legislative, and judicial branches of power, as well as our national media.
In general, with some exceptions, the major U.S. media outlets, by which I mean the media organizations and corporations that reach every day tens and into the hundreds of millions of Americans, they're owned by and advertised on major corporate sources, advertisers, and there's also a often revolving door relationship between the boards of directors of military contractors and large media outlets such as the big TV networks and so forth, and also the major advertisers. And so this is not a conspiracy issue, it's something much deeper than that. It's a structural relationship that exists between the largest, most powerful, most influential media outlets and what we could call the war industries. Tremendous amounts of profits being made on an ongoing basis by media outlets, the big ones, and also, of course, by the Pentagon military contractors, what has most recently been called the military-industrial intelligence media complex.
Corporate America is corporate tyranny. Every facet of our lives is dictated and influenced by their enormous power. Our food, our medical care, our courts, our colleges and universities, our work and our social lives. Most frightfully, corporations have seized control of our country's war-making power, a power that is meant to be in the hands of the people through Congress. Instead, corporate elites seek to enrich themselves and their shareholders by fomenting needless wars across the globe. In the face of such tremendous power, what can a citizen do? Do we have a responsibility to act? When bombs are dropped with our tax dollars and in the name of our country, are we compelled to respond? Who do we hold accountable for the killing of so many people, for war crimes, for crimes against humanity, and how do we bring them to justice? The Nuremberg trials of 1945 were military tribunals with legal authority holding accountable Nazi officials and German businessmen for waging wars of aggression, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Subsequent tribunals in Rwanda, Serbia, and Argentina have held government officials accountable. These legal tribunals were initiated by the government or governments of nations, with the power to carry out sentences of prison or, at times, execution. However, what happens when a government refuses to act in response to war crimes? Or worse, is complicit? What can the citizenry do? People's tribunals are initiated by the swelling anger and frustration of citizens who wish to hold accountable those individuals responsible for egregious and evil acts of behavior perpetrated on a national or global scale. What these people's tribunals lack in legal authority is made up by the power of a citizenry roused to moral action. These tribunals speak for the individual conscience, not the corporate conglomerate. Their power comes not from a few lawyers or elected officials, but from the masses. They are the democratization of the courts when the courts have been captured by the criminals. People's tribunals are not created by vigilantes, but by victims, not by countries, but by its citizens. A people's tribunal is grassroots justice. It seeks truth, accountability, reconciliation, and remedy. The United States wars on terror have killed, directly and indirectly, an estimated 6 million people in the last 20 years. They have rendered some 7 million children subject to malnutrition and starvation. The cost to the United States taxpayer is estimated to be between $8 and $16 trillion. Weapons manufacturers have reaped the greatest share of this public largesse. The Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal has charged 4 United States corporations with war crimes and crimes against humanity. They are Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, and General Atomics. These 4 corporations are representative of the United States war industry and its criminal acts in fomenting needless war against civilian populations. Specifically, this People's Tribunal has charged these 4 defendants with aiding and abetting the United States government in the commission of war crimes and crimes against humanity by knowingly producing and selling weapons that result in the deaths of not only combatants, but of non-combatants, of civilians, and they do so for profit. They are modern-day merchants of death. On November 10, 2022, members of this tribunal hand-delivered subpoenas to Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, and General Atomics in the Washington, D.C. area, requesting that they produce documentation specifically outlined in the subpoena, which would either exonerate them or incriminate them. They had 90 days to respond to the tribunal's subpoenas. Each of the 4 corporations failed to respond. On February 14, 2023, this tribunal issued and delivered contempt citations to the 4 defendants for failing to respond to the subpoenas. While this tribunal holds the 4 defendants in contempt, these 4 defendants have long held the United States citizens and innocents of the world in contempt. Their malicious disregard for human life, their lack of any moral compass, their inhumanity in the pursuit of profit can no longer continue. This tribunal calls them to give account. In the coming weeks, the tribunal will present evidence proving that the 4 defendants have used their corporate influence to commandeer the halls of Congress through bribery, co-opt our governing systems, deplete our national treasury, and lead us into perpetual war. Retired military officials, victims, military analysts, scholars, doctors, theologians, and lawyers all will give testimony, proving that Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, and General Atomics knew their products were being used to kill large numbers of civilians, and yet they not only continued to make and sell these products, but they created an atmosphere in the halls of our government where war became inevitable. They did this for money. Trillions of dollars flowed from the U.S. Treasury to the silk-lined pockets of these corporate war makers. American citizens suffered the loss of their national wealth. Civilian populations in foreign lands suffered the loss of uncounted loved ones, the decimation of their cities, the fragmentation and economic exploitation of their countries. These four corporate defendants have immense power and influence. But we, the citizens of the world, are a force more powerful. We call this tribunal to order. Come, war profiteers, give account. Let the truth set us free.
Good evening. Before welcoming and introducing the international jurors who have so kindly agreed to hear the evidence of this tribunal, I have an excerpt from a message that comes from one of our most principled, courageous, and encouraging supporters, the Irish Nobel laureate, Mairead Maguire. I write, she says, to wish all of you every good luck as you begin your very important work to call out the merchants of death both in the United States and around the world. Your tribunal is being held while a genocidal Holocaust is being carried out by Israel on the Palestinians of Gaza. It is time now to reject war and militarism, restore international law for everyone, and build a culture of no killing and non-violence culture everywhere. I believe hope lies with the youth, whose imagination, determination, and courage will change their world. Peace, Mairead Maguire. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Ajamu Baraka. Ajamu Baraka is an American political activist and the 2016 Green Party nominee for Vice President of the United States. He served as the founding executive director of the U.S. Human Rights Network and worked with over 400 organizations to develop a shadow report, which concerned U.S. compliance with the terms of the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. He has served on the boards of several human rights organizations, including Amnesty International, the Center for Constitutional Rights, and Africa Action. Baraka has taught political science at the university level and is currently an editor and contributing columnist for the Black Agenda Report and a writer for Counterpunch and the national organizer and spokesperson for the Black Alliance for Peace. We thank Ajamu Baraka. Basir Bita, who is deeply committed to nonviolence, has a passion for social change through education and is currently a coordinator at the University of Central Asia seeking grants for Afghans in diaspora. Basir's own experience of war crimes in Afghanistan inspired him to pursue an MS in mental health counseling at Marquette University, focusing on the deep trauma experienced by immigrants. He is currently chronicling his own experience of the atrocities that surrounded the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and subsequent takeover by the Taliban in August of 2021. Basir Bita, we welcome you to say hello to this group tonight.
Hello, everyone. Deeply pleased to be with you.
Thank you, Basir. Dr. Marjorie Cohn is a retired criminal defense attorney, professor emerita at Thomas Jefferson School of Law, former president of the National Lawyers Guild, and a member of the Bureau of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers and the Advisory Board of Veterans for Peace. She is now the founding dean of the People's Academy of International Law. She is a legal and political analyst who writes a regular column for Truth Out, does frequent media commentary, and has published several books. She testified before Congress about the Bush administration torture policy and debated the legality of the war in Afghanistan at the Oxford Union. Marjorie Cohn, could you introduce yourself tonight?
Yes, I am so pleased to be part of this important tribunal, particularly in light of the genocide happening before our very eyes in Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you. Matthew Ho is the Associate Director of the Eisenhower Media Network and an Emeritus Senior Fellow with the Center for International Policy. He is a 100% disabled Marine combat veteran, and in 2009, he resigned his position with the State Department in Afghanistan to protest escalation of the war. And I believe Matthew Ho is with us tonight. Oh, forgive me, he'll be with us in the future. Dr. Dinora La Luz Feliciano has a PhD in philosophy, a Master of Laws and Comparative Law, and a Master in Library and Information Sciences. Dr. La Luz currently works as a Spanish editor for the University of Puerto Rico. She is also part of the executive committee of the American Association of Jurists. And thank you, Dr. La Luz, for being with us tonight. Rania Masri, PhD, is a longtime activist and organizer committed to issues of justice. Her research and activism have centered on anti-sanctions regarding Iraq, anti-war regarding Iraq, Afghanistan, and Lebanon, anti-occupation and anti-apartheid regarding Palestine, environmental justice, and civil and voting rights. She served as an expert in the Court of Conscience, during which she presented testimony on the environmental impact of the 2006 Israeli war on Lebanon. Rania Masri is currently a co-director at the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, having returned to the United States from Lebanon in 2022. Rania Masri, thank you for greeting our group this evening.
I'm honored to be with you all and very excited to be working with all the participants and taking the knowledge that will be shared over these 4 months and making them more public and working more aggressively to build a stronger anti-war movement nationally and globally. Thank you again.
Thank you, Rania Masri. Arwa Mokdad is a peace advocate with Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation. Through this work, she supports and aids programs in Yemen while participating in policy efforts in the United States to end support for the war. While in Yemen, she visited health facilities across the country and interviewed members of civil society on the conflict. She has worked and lived extensively in the Middle East, North Africa region. She is currently a Master's of Philosophy candidate working to research conflict mediation within Yemen at the University of Oxford. Her work focuses on local, regional, and international peace-building efforts within Yemen, and growing up between the U.S. and the Middle East, Arwa is interested in the role of foreign actors within the region, as well as local activism and perceptions of intervention. Dr. Mazen Khamsia. Professor Mazen Khamsia previously served at U.S. universities, including Texas, Duke, and Yale. He is founder and volunteer director of the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability at Bethlehem University in Bethlehem. Khamsia published over 170 scientific papers, over 30 book chapters, hundreds of articles, and several books on topics ranging from cultural heritage to human rights to biodiversity conservation to cancer. He oversaw a number of projects ranging from formulating the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan to empowerment projects with farmers, women, and children that benefited tens of thousands. He is laureate of the Paul K. Feyerabend Foundation Award and the Takrim Award, among others. And you can read his incredibly important blogs every day from Palestine at khumsia.org. Dr. Ibrahim Salah is an MD, retired pathologist who left Basra, Iraq's second largest city, to come to Britain in 1981 after graduating from Basra Medical School in 1977. He had trained for 4 years in Basra, one of Iraq's main hospitals, as a junior doctor and a pathologist. In England, he worked as a consultant histopathologist in the National Health Service hospitals from 1986 till he retired in 2013. He visited Iraq regularly from 1982 to 2011. His views were often published or covered in UK media regarding his opposition to the US war and US UN economic sanctions against Iraq from 2000 onward. Dr. Salah was an active member of Voices in the Wilderness UK. Dr. Salah, could you greet us tonight? I know he's with us, but Dr. Salah, if you turn on your camera and greet us, we'd be so pleased to see you. Well, we'll move on. Dr. Abdi Ismail Samatar. Abdi Ismail Samatar is a professor of geography, environment, and society at the University of Minnesota. Abdi is also an extraordinary professor in the Department of Politics at the University of Pretoria. He was elected to the Somali parliament as a senator in 2022, the author of 5 books and over 80 articles, chapters, and essays. And among his books is Framing Somalia, Beyond Africa's Merchants of Misery. And finally, Dr. Salah, could you introduce yourself to our group?
Sorry.
Could you unmute yourself, Dr. Salah?
Yes. Good morning, good evening. And thank you so much for inviting me to be on this panel. Thank you so much, Kathy.
We're so pleased to have you. And Dr. Samatar, could you introduce yourself to the group?
I'm humbled to serve in this tribunal and as a juror, and I look forward to working with all of those phenomenal people on the panel. With pleasure, and bless you.
Thank you so much. And may I also say that Dr. Dinora Laluz is in the audience, and I wonder if she could unmute herself and greet the group. And while that's happening, I'll first introduce Ann Wright. Ann Wright is a member of the advisory board of World Beyond War. She is based in Hawaii, and Ann is a retired U.S. Army Reserve colonel and a 29-year veteran of the Army and Army Reserves. She was also a diplomat in Nicaragua, Grenada, Somalia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Sierra Leone, Micronesia, Afghanistan, and Mongolia. She received the State Department's Award for Heroism for her actions during the Civil War in Sierra Leone. She resigned from the Department of State on March 19, 2003, in opposition to the Iraq War. She is the co-author of Dissent, Voices of Conscience, and she appeared in the documentary Uncovered. And I believe that Anne is presently in Jordan, having tried to enter Cairo to be part of groups of people that are trying to bring humanitarian aid into Gaza. And I wonder, Dr. Laluz, are you available to say hello to us now?
Yes, hi. Sorry about that, but I was having trouble with the electricity. There was no electricity here in Puerto Rico. So, I mean, where I live at least.
Well,
but in any case, I'm really glad to be part of this tribunal. I think it's very important to trial, to have a trial for companies. I'm part also of a group that is based in Geneva. We're participating in the transnational covenant to make mandatory the responsibility of transnational corporations.
We're
So
so fortunate to have you. Thank you very much for joining this tribunal's panel of jurors. We're certainly grateful also to Bill Quigley for being a special rapporteur, as we will prepare a written statement when the evidence has been judged. So again, I want to welcome everyone to this process and pass it on. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Kathy. Our primary inspiration for the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunals was a series of Nuremberg war crimes trials of German weapons makers in 1947, 2 years after the end of World War II. United States prosecutors charged 42 officials of 3 of Germany's largest war industrial firms, Krupp, IG Farben, and Flick, with a variety of war crimes and crimes against humanity. 27 of these officials were sent to prison. None were executed. This was the first time in human history that profit-making corporate war industrialists were held legally accountable for participating in war crimes. This historic moment began in 1944 and 1945 with the Allied liberation of Nazi concentration camps. The people of the world were exposed to the black and white photographs of masses of horribly abused, emaciated fellow human beings, and the photos of piles of human corpses, which we will not show here because they are so horribly graphic and gruesome. The mass atrocities of the Nazi government, notably including the killing of 6 million Jews, ignited a flash of truth-telling lightning into the shadowy, profoundly corrupt relationships between German corporate bosses and the Nazi politicians and military leaders whom they supported. Through Nuremberg, the world learned, for example, that Gustav Krupp and officials of extermination gas maker IG Farben were among 25 German corporate officials who, together, in 1933, provided about $30 million to bail out Adolf Hitler's Nazi Party, enabling the ascendancy of the Nazi dictatorship. The Brennan Center for Justice reports, Hitler addressed the group, saying, private enterprise cannot be maintained in a democracy. He also told the men that he would eliminate trade unions and communists. Hitler asked for their financial support and to back his vision for Germany. Without Krupp, Farben officials, and the others, World War II and the Holocaust very probably never would have happened. But the moment of global outrage in 1944 and 45, however extraordinary, was brief. The international law scholar Krisky Bars reports in an extremely insightful study that by 1947, the United States government wanted to rehabilitate German corporations so that they could be part of US-led global capitalism. US prosecutors and judges at Nuremberg were pushed to go lightly with the German war industrialists. Possibly the most important charge against the industrialists in terms of sending a message to all weapons makers was the charge of planning and waging wars of aggression. This charge was filed against Gustav Krupp and his son Alfred, who took control of the Krupp industries in 1943 during the war. Gustav, although indicted, did not stand trial because of illness. The charge of planning and waging aggressive war was also made against IG Farben officials. But under US government pressure, the aggressive war charge made against the Krupps was dropped, and the Farben officials were acquitted of the charge. Jail sentences were imposed primarily for enforcing slavery and theft of property from other countries. In 1951, most of those convicted had served their sentences, and the US High Commissioner in Germany released Alfred Krupp from prison and restored his properties to him. By 1952, portions of IG Farben were producing materials for the US to use in its colonial war in Korea. Below the surface, Dr. Bars writes, a deeper US need can be discerned. The need to reassure American industrialists, perhaps counterintuitively through the trials, that the production for Korea and for other potentially aggressive wars would not lead to their prosecution. By 1957, Alfred Krupp was on the cover of the prominent pro-corporate US magazine, Time. Inside was a long article glorifying Krupp as the ruler and sole owner of Germany's $1 billion Krupp industrial empire. Krupp told his friends, with half-concealed amusement at the time, the article said, that the US and Britain wanted Krupp to produce weapons to help build the military power of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. Our moment today is much like the starkly illuminating moment of 1944 and 1945, in which we are stunned and horrified to witness the day-by-day mass murder, terrorizing, and immiseration of more than 2.5 million Palestinians by the government of Israel, 10 times the number of people killed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In our roles as prosecutors of the Merchants of Death Tribunal, we have gathered evidence showing that what is happening to the Palestinian people now is a highly concentrated form of what has been happening to millions of poor people of color since 9/11. They have died, lost family members and means of support, seeing their domestic lives and cultures destroyed in the so-called war on terror. That has been a war of colonial conquest and plunder. Our work is to show also how the leaders of the most important US weapons makers, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, RTX, Raytheon, and the killer drone maker General Atomics, have enabled US wars since 9/11 and have been accomplices to war crimes resulting from these wars. And our role is to ask not only whether profit making from weapons production should be permitted, but more, whether humanity can any longer tolerate war and repression as acceptable ways of deciding who shall have access to and benefit from Earth's resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. This tribunal had originally planned to present its evidence chronologically, beginning with the US invasion of Afghanistan and then proceeding to Iraq and subsequent countries. However, recent events in Gaza compelled us to change that schedule and be responsive to the immense suffering now happening in that area. The occupied territories of Palestine were always a focus of this tribunal, and we had selected Operation Cast Lead as one egregious example to highlight of the complicity of US weapons makers committing war crimes in Gaza. Operation Cast Lead must be viewed as part of a long process of Israeli war crimes funded by United States tax dollars and facilitated by United States weapons makers. Without the merchants of death, these war crimes could not occur. This past Monday, November 6th, this tribunal asked U.S. Air Force veteran and war industry expert Christian Sorensen to speak with us again about what is happening in Gaza these past weeks, and specifically the weapons the United States is providing to the Israelis, weapons they are currently using against Palestinian civilians. Christian just published a map of weapons contractors located all across the United States, detailing what weapon systems they are working on. I'll put the link to that map in the chat for all of you to save and to view later. We have a 10-minute video update from Christian, which will be immediately followed by our main evidentiary video tonight, Operation Cast Lead. The two videos combined run a total of 35 minutes. At the conclusion of these two videos, in approximately 35 minutes, we will return for very brief concluding remarks and important reminders. We do wish to warn you again that some of the images in the videos are graphic and may be disturbing. They document the savagery of war and the complicity of the four defendants in these wars. Thank you.
My name is Christian Sorensen. It is November 6, 2023. The title of my presentation today is U.S. Industry Sales to Israel Since Operation Cast Lead of Winter 2008-2009. Cast Lead is known as the Gaza Massacre by Palestinians. Sales have been comprehensive. Israel's purchases from U.S. military industry are largely subsidized by the U.S. taxpayer. The U.S. government gives the Israeli government roughly $3.8 billion a year, and Israel uses much of that money to buy from U.S. industry. The U.S. government stresses FMS is, quote, a fundamental tool of U.S. foreign policy. U.S. sales to Israel have been comprehensive, covering land, air, ordnance, training, and more. Today's presentation gives a representative example. Attack helicopters. Boeing AH-64, quote, Apache attack helicopter. Look at it. Sustainment. This is from Boeing's website, April 2021. Services package will enhance Apache's sustainment capabilities for the Israeli Air Force. Fighter attack jets. It's an attack jet because it's capable of dropping bombs. Israel's primary jets are the Lockheed Martin F-35 fighter jet, featuring RTX Pratt & Whitney engines, and Lockheed Martin F-16 fighter jets, featuring RTX Pratt & Whitney engines. RTX is in the middle of a 15-year contract with the Israeli military to maintain these engines and the engines on the Boeing F-15. Cargo aircraft move troops and weaponry. Lockheed Martin's C-130 cargo aircraft the Israeli military uses. The dates in parentheses are the dates of the contracting announcements. Rolls-Royce engines power these C-130 cargo aircraft. And DCS Corporation of Alexandria, Virginia has sold mission planning software maintenance and upgrades. And that software is used for aerial refueling and cargo aircraft. In terms of helicopters that move troops and weaponry, there's the Lockheed Martin Sikorsky CH-53 cargo helicopter featuring GE, General Electric, engines. Israel cannot get troops and weaponry in position around Gaza without these aircraft. Lockheed Martin's own website says it is, quote, proud of the significant role it has fulfilled in, and here are the public relations terms, the security of the state of Israel. Significant role. Ordnance. Ordnance are things that explode. Boeing Joint Direct Attack Munitions, JDAM. Boeing Small Diameter Bombs, SDB. Israel has received over 12,400 JDAM since 2009, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI. So Boeing makes JDAM kits, which guide bombs onto target, and Boeing also makes the GBU-39 small diameter bombs, according to the U.S. Air Force fact sheet. Israel has received over 8,500 SDB since 2010, according to SIPRI's Arms Transfer Database. One example of the many airstrikes on Gaza using U.S. weaponry. The airstrikes 31 October 2023 against the Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza. The Guardian analyzed strikes and consulted weapons experts. They indicated that the Israelis had used multiple JDAM. Mark Garlasco is former Pentagon chief of high-value targeting during the Iraq War. He pointed to JDAM. He also said, quote, JDAMs will burrow through the ground and have a delayed detonation, causing the building to collapse on itself. This explains the extent of the damage. Chris Cobb-Smith is a former UN weapons inspector. He also pointed to JDAM. The Guardian noted, quote, the Israeli Air Force recently posted images on X, formerly known as Twitter, of dozens of JDAM GBU-31 being loaded onto planes. There's a Reuters picture of the airstrikes. Absolute devastation. Jabalia, for context, is one of the most densely populated parts of Gaza, and Gaza itself is one of the most densely populated parts of the world. The United Nations established this camp in 1948 for Palestinians who were kicked out of their homes by people using violence to create the state of Israel in Palestine. And there's a BBC graphic on the right to show the population density. Paveway. Lockheed Martin and RTX make Paveway guidance kits, according to U.S. military contracting announcements and corporate press releases. Paveway kits guide bombs onto targets. Israel received 700 Paveway during 2018-2019, according to the SIPRI Arms Transfer Database. And this graphic on the right is from Lockheed Martin's website. These surface-to-surface rockets are used to attack from far away. Lockheed Martin Hellfire AGM-114 air-to-ground missiles Israel has in its arsenal. The Times of Israel reported in September 2014. Land vehicles provide mobility, move troops. Oshkosh Defense medium tactical vehicles, parts and training. Oshkosh has sold these to the Israelis, according to foreign military sales, military contracting announcements. These vehicles are used to resupply and transport troops. MDT armored vehicles have also been purchased by the Israelis. And products for armored personnel carriers, such as diesel engineering engines and transmission kits and power packs from Rolls-Royce. This is a picture of the Oshkosh Defense medium tactical vehicle. Further mobility is provided by Goodyear tires, BP gasoline, Petromax aviation fuel, and Valero aviation fuel. All those according to U.S. military contracting announcements. Let's recap. U.S. industry sells Israel weapons and technology for use in the air, on the ground, and to take life and destroy infrastructure. U.S. industry has also sold training, pilot training from the National Test Pilot School, Mojave, California. Pilot training from Flight Safety International, Columbus, Ohio. That on Gulfstream jets, which Israel uses to gather information from the air on Palestinians and on neighboring Arab countries. And GE has sold help maintaining aircraft systems. GE makes aircraft engines. Construction. Corporations contract with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to design and build infrastructure for the Israeli military. Notable recent examples include facilities above ground, below ground, upgrades to fuel stations for the Israeli military, new concrete, solar power plant at an Israeli military base, etc., etc. It's from one corporation's website, CDM Smith, notes that it has constructed 8 hardened aircraft shelters. And they point to their own, quote, legendary client service. This is legendary client service, their words. U.S. industry has also sold vision and communications gear, FLIR systems, weapon sights, and training for the vision. Those sights go onto small arms, such as rifles, things you can hold in your hand. And Data Link Solutions, communications gear. Data Link Solutions is a joint venture between RTX, formerly known as Raytheon Technologies, and BAE Systems. Think of it as networking equipment for aircraft, land vehicles, ships. What does leadership have to say? Well, there's something called the Leahy Law on the books in U.S. legal code. The Leahy Law states the U.S. government cannot transfer or furnish military equipment or technology to governments that seriously violate human rights. Okay? Josh Paul is former director, Office of Congressional and Public Affairs, State Department, Bureau of Political Military Affairs. Paul says, quote, there is a Leahy vetting process for Israel. It has never found an Israeli unit to be guilty of gross violations of human rights. Gross violation of human rights. It is a broken system. Paul resigned mid-October of this year, 2023, in protest of the U.S. government's unconditional support for Israel as Israel uses U.S. weaponry to attack civilians in Gaza. Craig Molkeber was director of the New York office for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. He resigned 28 October of this year. Quote, in his resignation letter, quote, once again, we are seeing a genocide unfolding before our eyes, and the organization we serve appears powerless to stop it. This is a textbook case of genocide. His words, a textbook case of genocide. He points to the United States, UK, and much of Europe as not just, quote, refusing to meet their treaty obligations, end quote, under the Geneva Conventions, but also arming Israel and providing diplomatic backing for the unfolding genocide in Gaza. On November 5th, the UN Refugee Agency issued a statement with other NGOs. Statement by the principals of the Interagency Standing Committee on the situation in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. Quote, we need an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. They note that more than 100 attacks against healthcare have been reported. They note scores of AIDS workers have been killed since October 7th, including 88 UNRWA colleagues, the highest number of UN fatalities ever recorded in a single conflict. And the overall death toll right now of Palestinians is approaching 10,000 as of today, November 6th, 2023. Top corporate executives see profit in Israeli military activity. RTX's chief executive recently acknowledged that his corporation stood to, quote, benefit from the increase in military funding, as reported by Business Insider on 24 October 2023. Journalist Matthew Gault reported, quote, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and RTX all mentioned the potential business opportunities of the Israel-Hamas war on earnings calls this week. That was the week of 26 October. Stocks of weapon makers jumped 7 percentage points right after the hostilities kicked off on 7 October 2023. CNN's Nicole Goodkind reported on 18 October 2023. General Dynamics chief financial officer on the corporation's 25 October earnings call said, quote, but I think if you look at the incremental demand potential coming out of that, the biggest one to highlight, and that really sticks out, is probably on the artillery side. General Dynamics makes a lot of artillery, particularly 155 millimeter shells. The head of aerospace and defense equity research at Morgan Stanley pointed out on RTX's 24 October 2023 earnings call, quote, looking at the White House's $106 billion supplemental funding request, you've got equipment for Ukraine, air and missile defense for Israel, and replenishment of stockpiles for both. And this seems to fit quite nicely with the Raytheon defense portfolio. Thank you for your time.
Since 2007, the Gaza Strip has been under a severe regime of closures and restrictions on the movement of people, goods, and services as a result of Israel's border closing of that area. Necessities of life such as food, medical supplies, fuel, electricity, school items, repair and construction materials were and remain in drastically short supply. According to the 2009 United Nations report entitled Fact-Finding Mission to the Gaza Conflict, Gaza's economy has been systematically depleted, the health sector beleaguered, the population made dependent on humanitarian assistance for survival and for the basics of daily life. Since 2007, periodic mortar firing and shelling has occurred between both Israel and the Palestinians. In 2008, a truce was negotiated but soon violated. This was the situation in the Gaza Strip when the Israeli armed forces launched their offensive called Operation Cast Lead in December of 2008. Israel, it must be noted, has historically been the largest recipient of U.S. military aid and U.S. weapons. Without U.S.-made weapons, Israeli attacks on civilian sites in Palestine could not occur with such frequency and with such cruelty. On December 27, 2008, the Israeli military deployed its Navy, Air Force, and Army against the people living in Gaza. It included two main phases, the air phase and the air-land phase. It lasted from December 27, 2008 to January 18, 2009. The Israeli offensive began with a week-long air attack using U.S.-made F-16 fighter jets and AH-64 Apache attack helicopters, striking numerous civilian buildings such as Gaza government offices, homes, hospitals, and 24 police stations. The Army was responsible for the ground invasion, which began on January 3, 2009, when ground Israeli troops entered Gaza from the north and from the east. The Israeli Navy shelled the Gaza coast during operations. The assault injured over 5,300 people and killed 1,383 Palestinians, of whom 333 were children. Israeli forces destroyed the homes of over 3,400 Palestinian families and left thousands of civilians homeless and physically impaired. According to the UN's fact-finding mission to the Gaza conflict, missiles fired from Apache helicopters targeted civilians and civilian infrastructure on numerous occasions over the course of the assault. Amnesty International documented the use of Hellfire missiles to kill children and medical staff in Gaza. This news report from Al Jazeera details one attack in particular during Operation Cast Lead.
Hello and welcome to Witness. I'm Raghi Omar. On the 27th of December 2008, the Israeli Defense Force began a brutal air assault on the Gaza Strip that was to kill around 1,400 Palestinians and leave thousands of Gazans wounded. The death toll included a very high proportion of women and children. A special United Nations investigation after the war reported that the Israeli army had deliberately targeted civilians in actions that it said amounted to war crimes and, in some respects, crimes against humanity. Just days into the war, in early January, the extended al-Samuni family, some 48 men, women and children, was attacked in the homes they occupied together in the south of Gaza, and almost all of them were killed. 13-year-old Almaza, Jewel, is one of the very few who survived the attack in which 30 members of her family died, many before her own eyes. A girl called Jewel is Almaza's story, a heartbreaking eyewitness account of the war in Gaza. From the rubble of her former home, Almaza walks us through the wasteland and recounts, with a worldliness beyond her years, the massacre of her family.
أنا اسمي ألماظ إبراهيم حلمي محمود السموني، الصف السابع، عمري 13 سنة. كل ما بطلع بالمستقبل سياسية عشان أجيب حقوق الأطفال اللي هم محرومين من أهاليهم، اللي تربوا يتامى. كنت بتذكر أهلي، كنت بتذكر لما استشهدوا قدامي، يعني أطلع على ابن أخويا هيك اتلفت لقيته مستشهد، أطلع اتلفت على الجهة الثانية لقيت أهلي كليتهم فوق بعض مستشهدين، يعني مرميين على بعض هيك كوم مستشهدين، يعني منظر بقدرش أتخيله. عيلتي كلها تروح مرة واحدة، يعني مين؟ يعني 30 نفر من عيلتي، والله ظلم يعني هلقيت بمر علي العيد، بمر علي حاجة، يعني ما لاقيش عمامي، ما لاقيش، يعني يوم العيد بقى اروح ازور عمامي، اروح ازورهم، يعني اروح على دار عمي طلال، اروح على دار عمي رشاد، اروح على دار عمي عطية، يعني كل هدول يعني ايه ذنبي؟ يعني انا احرم من اهلي، انا احرم من عمامي، انا احرم من امي. يعني كنت أنا موجودة بالبيت، يعني ما كناش عارفين حاجة. الصبحيات يعني هيك، يعني من أذان الفجر هيك، يعني الساعة 6 صاروا يخشوا اليهود. أول حاجة خشوا عن طريق طائرات، لقوا المنطقة آمنة، صاروا يخشوا الدبابات والجرافات. بعديها يعني الساعة هيك، يعني الساعة 4 هيك بالليل، ما شفنا إلا القنابل والرصاص تخش الدار. رحنا بالصالون، في متر يعني بيننا وبين عمي طلال ممر هيك صغير، صاروا يرموا فيه قنابل هيك صوت عالي وتطلع ريحة. عاد هذه القنابل يعني احنا كليتنا بطلنا نسمع، بطلنا نتنفس، انخنقنا، يعني جينا نموت. ما شفنا إلا اليهود فتحت خرج كبير من الحيطة وحطوا أسلحتهم علينا. يعني منظرهم كان مخيف إلي، يعني لو جوني بالليل مش هعرفهم طبعا، يعني حتى الخيال إلهم ما بتشوفوهمش. يعني طلعونا من الدار ودونا على دار وائل، اللي هي وائل السموني. قعدنا فيها 3 أيام بدون أكل ولا شرب ولا مية. اللي الأطفال اللي كانوا يعني بدهم يشربوا، اللي عمرهم هدول 6 أشهر وبدهم يشربوا، يعني ما كانش حليب إلهم كمان. يعني قعدنا 3 أيام هدول، يعني راح أخويا يجيب حطب بعد ال3 أيام هدول. أدوب أخويا بيطلع من باب الدار، يعني أدوب بيطلع لهم رموا عليه صاروخ، استشهد أخويا. عبالنا جوا لهم، يعني أنا طلعت أنا ومرت أخويا وابنها، ابنها اللي عمره 9 أشهر عدموه، عدموه عدم، يعني طخوا عليه بالرصاص واستشهد ابنها قدامه، يعني قدام، يعني قدام أمه، وهو يعني بحضن أمه بحنان أمه، يعني عدموه عدم ورا أبوه.
According to Amnesty International, there is evidence that Israel used dime weapons during Operation Cast Lead, which are dense, inert metal explosives carried by Hellfire missiles. They have enormous energy and release micro shrapnel particles, killing and injuring large numbers of people nearby. According to a report published by the United Nations Human Rights Council, Israeli forces deliberately targeted civilian objects and failed to take every possible precaution to minimize civilian casualties, thereby violating international law. In addition to using dime weapons, Israel was also found to have been illegally using white phosphorus on civilians, a jellied munition similar to napalm, which burns human flesh to the bone. The Israeli armed forces launched numerous attacks against buildings and persons of the Gaza authorities, including the Palestinian Legislative Council building and the Gaza main prison. Both buildings were destroyed and could no longer be used. The United Nations mission found that the attacks on those buildings constituted deliberate attacks on civilian objects in violation of the rule of international humanitarian law, whereby attacks must be strictly limited to military objectives.
Saturday, 27th December began like any other day. At 11:30 in the morning, as children were leaving school, Israeli F-16 jet fighters and Apache helicopters launched a series of airstrikes against targets in Gaza. Local medics said at least 225 Palestinians were killed that day alone, in what would be the first day of a 22-day war. Most of those killed that day were Hamas policemen. Women and children also died. Israeli bombs struck militant bases, Hamas government buildings, a science building in the Islamic University, a UN-operated school and a Palestinian refugee camp, and a mosque. When the smoke cleared, it was carnage.
The United Nations mission examined the attacks against 6 police facilities, 4 of them during the first minutes of the military operations on December 27, 2008, resulting in the death of 99 Palestinian policemen and 9 members of the public. Overall, the approximately 240 policemen killed by Israeli forces constitute more than 1/6 of the Palestinian casualties. The circumstances of the attacks seem to indicate, and the government of Israel's July 2009 report on the military operations confirm, that the policemen were deliberately targeted and killed on the ground that the police are, in the eyes of Israel, part of the Palestinian military forces in Gaza. On January 15, 2009, the field office compound of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in Gaza City came under shelling with high explosives and white phosphorus munitions. The UN mission noted that the attack was extremely dangerous, as the compound offered shelter to between 600 and 700 civilians and contained a huge fuel depot. The Israeli armed forces continued their attack on this site over several hours, despite having been fully alerted to the risk created. The mission concluded that the Israeli armed forces violated the requirement under international law to take all feasible precautions in the choice of means and method of attack, with a view to avoiding or minimizing incidental loss of civilian life, injury to civilians, and damage to civilian objects. The UN mission examined the mortar shelling of Al-Fakura Junction next to a United Nations relief school, which at the time was sheltering more than 1,300 people. The Israeli armed forces fired at least 4 mortar shells. One landed in the courtyard of a family home, killing 11 people assembled there. 3 other shells landed on the street, killing an additional 24 people and injuring as many as 40. According to the UN mission, the firing of at least 4 mortar shells to attempt to kill a small number of specified individuals in a setting where large numbers of civilians were going about their daily business and where 1,368 people were sheltering nearby, does not meet the test of what a reasonable commander would have determined to be an acceptable loss of civilian life for the military advantage sought. The UN mission thus considered this attack to have been indiscriminate, in violation of international law, and to have violated the right to life of the Palestinian civilians killed in these actions. Operation Cast Lead is just one example of the U.S. and U.S. weapons manufacturers supplying billions of dollars in weapons to the Israeli armed forces, which then uses them in violation of international and humanitarian law against civilian populations in Gaza. The result is enormous profit for Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, and General Atomics, and death and destruction for the suffering people of Gaza. The 4 defendants in this tribunal know the result of their weapon sales to Israel, since those atrocities are covered routinely in the media and are outlined by human rights groups, as we have just discussed. This tribunal interviewed retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel and Professor of History William Astore. Here is what he had to say about whether weapons manufacturers knew their products killed innocent people.
And do you believe that the weapons manufacturers are aware that the products they produce are killing non-combatants?
Yeah, I mean, you would have to be blind if not to know that. In fact, I would go further. One of the interesting aspects of being in the military is that you see a lot of footage. Like I remember going to rah-rah meetings where we would see camera footage of Hellfire missiles or other guided missiles hitting targets, and you see people just being blown up on the screen. Of course, it was typically infrared. I mean, it wasn't visceral, which made it worse. It made it more like a video game, right? But if I'm not mistaken, I don't go on YouTube to watch these things, but I think there's a lot of videos available on YouTube, showing, American attacks using various missiles and guns from AC-130 gunships and so on. And unfortunately, a lot of people see this stuff. It's sort of like, I guess you'd call it war porn in a way, and they get excited by it. It's like we see it as a video game, and we see it as wiping out the other, the enemy, the other. We don't see them as human beings, and it's one of the great weaknesses of human nature, I guess, that under the force of indoctrination and propaganda and fear and all the rest, that we watch this stuff and we develop these weapons, to kill without thinking of the victims as people who are just like us.
For years, Israel has been the top recipient of U.S. military and economic assistance. The most commonly cited figure is $3 billion per year. Israel is so devoted to U.S. military hardware It now has the world's largest fleet of F-16s outside the United States, currently possessing more than 200 of these fighter jets. Another 102 F-16s are on order. U.S. military aid has helped transform Israel's armed forces into one of the most technologically sophisticated militaries in the world. Lockheed Martin's presence in Israel dates back to the early 1990s. Lockheed Martin Corporation is the world's largest defense contractor by sales volume. And in April 2014, it was announced that they would be forming a new technology-based partnership and subsidiary based in Israel. The Israeli subsidiary, known as Lockheed Martin Israel Limited, registered with the Israeli Corporations Authority in August of 2014 and became primarily concerned with cybersecurity issues, information technology, data analytics, and cloud storage. In addition to this collaboration, Lockheed also sells military equipment to Israel, including the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter Jet and the C-130 military transport airplane. Israel and U.S. weapons manufacturer Raytheon jointly developed a GPS-guided mortar in the wake of the 2006 Lebanon War, which went into production in Israel in 2008. Israel acknowledged using them in a January 6, 2009 strike that killed 43 Palestinians outside a United Nations school used as a shelter. The Israeli Defense Forces also admitted to using white phosphorus shells in that same attack on the school. Amnesty International found remnants of air-delivered munitions ranging from 20mm cannon and Hellfire missiles fired from helicopters and unmanned drones to large fragments of laser-guided and other bombs dropped from F-16 warplanes, as well as pieces of rocket mortars, circuit boards, and other electrical components of the missiles. Fragments from these bombardments are all over Gaza, on the streets, in school playgrounds, in hospitals, and in people's homes. Fragments from one 500-pound bomb contain the inscription, "For use on Mk-82 fin-guided bomb," with traceable markings indicating that the fin was produced by Raytheon. In its frequent military offensives against Gaza, the Israeli military uses Raytheon's 5,000-pound GBU-28 bunker buster bomb and laser-guided paveway bombs made by Lockheed Martin, as well as AGM-65 Maverick air-to-ground missiles made by Raytheon, the AIM-9X missiles made by Raytheon, and the AIM Sidewinder missiles also made by defendant Raytheon. These missiles and bombs are typically fired or dropped by the Israeli Air Force's F-16 and F-35 fighter jets. Even after the start of Operation Cast Lead and reports of serious violations of international humanitarian law by the Israeli Defense Forces in Gaza, the U.S. authorities continued to authorize large consignments of U.S. weapons to Israel, including white phosphorus munitions. Since the United States government and its co-conspirators in the U.S. weapons industry, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and General Atomics, among others, will not stop the slaughter of innocents, it is up to the citizenry to both envision and to enact a new world based on mutual respect for nations and for people, an understanding of our limited resources which must be shared, and a recognition of the limited time we have left in which to accomplish these goals. As citizens, we must demand peace. We must live it each day, bring it to fruition, or the consequences are dire for us and all the world. Whether war crimes are committed in Gaza or Iraq, Afghanistan or Somalia, or anywhere else in the world, the perpetrators must be held accountable. Crimes committed in Operation Cast Lead have exploded into the crimes occurring today. It's part of a systematic process, which we intend to shine a light on and hold accountable the actors. We seek to create a community informed with the facts and committed to taking nonviolent action. Please look for our emails this week containing links not just to tonight's recording, but also to the next video segments of this tribunal. Again, share these videos with everyone you know. Each video will be approximately 30 minutes in length, easily viewable during the week. And join us for our meetup sessions, the first one occurring on Sunday, December 3rd at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a good evening.